Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, the Rangers had a great opportunity to win three in a row for the first time since November, and they couldn't get it done last night. They are still in that last playoff spot, but it really feels flimsy, doesn't it?
So I have a question for you. Do you want to look at this through the lens of this is like the most mid team to ever exist, or do you want to look at this through the lens of this is Goldilocks? They're not ass, but they're not good either, because that's kind of where
Isn't
you
that
have
what
to
mid
be.
is?
That's kind of the conundrum you're facing if you're a glass half full or a glass half empty type of person, because with 14 games remaining, this is a team that's consistently struggling to score more than 3 goals in a game. And look, the Oilers have been a reasonably good defensive team this year. A lot of their woes in that department have been tied to substandard goaltending, some injuries on the back end, but these are not the Oilers of last year who were 1 goal away from winning the Stanley Cup. They have been pretty miserable since the start of early February. They under 500 in the month of February, like a 300 points percentage since the Four Nations face-off break, and they've consistently been losing McDavid's minutes, where his goal differential going into last Thursday against the Devils was like minus 13 in Connor McDavid minutes over the last month. And the Rangers, for what it's worth, were in that game. And
Sure.
there aren't a lot of consolations at this point. You know, we're well past the point about talking about effort and moral victories and building something, because right now this is survival. The Rangers are in the deep end of the pool, and every other stroke of them treading water, their head's going under the water. And sometimes they're actively stopping paddling and sinking on purpose for some reason. And then other times, someone throws them a life preserver and they start to tug on it and get to the edge of the pool. And then they let go of the life preserver for some reason. So when you look around, and we were talking about this right before we went on, none of these teams are impressive. Montreal, the Islanders, Ottawa, Columbus, none of these teams are good. All of these teams are going to be it's going to be a tall order for any of these teams to beat a Washington or to beat a Florida or a Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs. All of these teams have major deficiencies, mostly in the defensive department, which I do find interesting that there's significant overlap there. But the Rangers are a really, really average team, and this is very different from the struggles they've had over the last few years.
Well, even the most, positive fans have to look around and say to themselves, this team has not won three in a row since the middle of like November, right? So December, January, February, March. It's been 4 months since that happened. And if that isn't the absolute definition of a mid team, then I don't know what is. Again, you can have your pom poms out and say, oh, like, I'm gonna cheer for my team no matter what. And
You can
I'm
enjoy the
right. You
games.
can enjoy the
Yeah.
games, but this is as mid as you can possibly get when you are cheering for a team that hasn't won 3-0 in 4 months. Like there, you couldn't possibly get as average as that. Like their record right now is 33, 29, and 6. That is aggressively average. Aggressively average. And that, I joke. I was DMing with somebody yesterday, and I brought it up on the show a couple of times as well. Like the head canon in my head is this team is the 2012 LA Kings. They make it in the playoffs in the last day of the regular season, and then they go on this ridiculous run to win the Stanley Cup. That is not happening. But I am currently living in that delusion that I've created for myself in my head of like, okay, this is a painfully average team. However, come the playoffs, they'll magically figure it out and they'll go on and they'll just destroy everybody win the cup. It's not going to happen. But that is essentially my saving grace at this point because there's nothing in the last 14 games that will magically get resolved. The offense is mid, the defense is mid, like the transition is mid, the goaltending hasn't been as off the charts as it, should be in order to steal these games. Like, Shesterkin's not pulling a 975 over the course of 10 games in order for the Rangers to win 8 of them, right? Like, these things aren't happening. When everything else is mid and the goaltending isn't Dominic Hasek level, This team is getting very much exposed, and you saw that again last night. Even though they played well against Edmonton, like Connor McDavid, I think only had one shot. Now it did go in the net; it was a nice shot, but he only did have one shot. Draisaitl, the couple of chances that he had, the defense did a good job for the most part in clogging up the middle of the ice, but you only scored one goal. Also, if you're blaming Shesterkin, dog, he can't score the goals too. He's not on the power play with the guys that couldn't generate anything except for that one post early on in the game. Like you can't. It's like if you lose a game 1-0 and you blame the goaltender on the loss. Like, dog, you didn't score. Like okay, have Hasek in there. Have Hasek. You know what? Have Hasek, Wah, Brodeur all stand in the net. All three of them. If you're not going to score any goals, it doesn't matter. So what difference does it make?
And that's really that's really an inflection point in conversation. If I'm meeting someone for the first time and I'm trying to feel out how much they understand and think about hockey, usually their perception of goaltending is how I understand how much they actually perceive and know about the game, because the casual fan perspective is if the goalie is good, they stop the puck. And that really saps the conversation of context, of the sequence that builds up to the play and ultimately results in the goal or the save. It doesn't account for pre-shot motion. It doesn't account for the goalie positioning. It doesn't account for screens. It doesn't account for redirects, deflections, what have you. Would you like Shesterkin to have the Arvidsson shot? Yeah, you would. Would you like Shesterkin to have the McDavid shot? Yeah, you would. You also only scored one goal in a game where you're playing a goalie who's under a 900 save percentage for the year. And that's the type of game where you needed to find a way. And I know we said this last week, the week before. These are not guys coming out with their hair on fire trying to make things happen in these games. These are slogs for large stretches. These are low event games. And the conversation about effort and intensity, I think that fundamentally misses the boat. And I remember way back in December when they were in the doldrums of that 5-15 stretch, I remember saying something along the lines of, they're just not that talented of a hockey team. And right now, think about it. This team added a point per game forward a month and change ago. JT Miller has 18 points in 18 games as a Ranger. And that's ostensibly done nothing for their overall results. If you go and look at their chances, their expected goals, their high danger chances, all of those numbers are within one whole chance of what they were before they added a point per game player to this team. And if dropping somebody who is close to, if not a superstar, into your team doesn't materially change the production and the flow of play, I think that tells you a lot about the group that you already had.
Of
We
course.
always say that it's not the biggest fish you add at the trade deadline that usually ends up winning the Stanley Cup. We always say it's the targeted addition, because if you need to add somebody who is that high profile, who is that good, that usually tells you that your existing infrastructure isn't good enough to be there. It's why when you look at years past, Florida adding Vladimir Tarasenko last year, you think about Vegas 2 years ago, adding Ivan Barbashev and Jonathan Quick, Colorado adding Josh Manson and Arturi Lehkonen, the Lightning adding Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. The list goes on and on. Those targeted additions that are playing 13, 14 minutes per night in the bottom six, maybe kill penalties, sneak onto your second power play. Those are the guys that put teams over the top. The Rangers added JT Miller to a team that looked like it was lottery bound, and now they're slightly above bad. I won't say they're actively bad, but they're not impressive. They are not particularly good. And adding a player of this caliber to your team was supposed to be a shot in the arm, a kick in the butt. And yeah, Zibanejad's been a little bit better. The power play is still not very good, even though
Brutal.
they've added JT Miller to what's a power play that features two forwards who've been over a point per game in Panarin and Zibanejad. Kreider, who's been close to a point per game, has a 50-goal season under his belt, even though he hasn't been on the power play the last few weeks. And then Fox working his way back from injury, who's been a point per game defenseman in the NHL. So you added somebody who is actively good at hockey, and all you are is mid now. And we're supposed to feel good about A, the short term, and B, the long term. This is a really tall proposition, and I generally gauge where the common person's opinions at based on, like, when I talk to my uncle who's on Rangers Facebook, like when he tells me things and I get a perception of where the conversation's at from that end of the spectrum. Like the day they traded Lindgren and VZ to Colorado, we were getting breakfast and he was talking to me, like he said something along the lines of, they only gave Borgen that extension because they knew they were going to look bad trading Kako for nothing, right? And I was like, if this is the talking points that are coming from Facebook, I think people are really starting to realize that, oh, we kind of missed our boat. We kind of missed the boat. We're standing on the dock with our tickets for the boat, and the boat already left. This team,
Yeah.
even if they get in, you feel good about this team playing Florida or Washington? Like, look at the scores in the games when they've played Washington this year. I mean,
Right.
it's it's a very tall order, and there's nothing about this team other than Shesterkin that inspires me any semblance of confidence right now. And even as good as Miller's been, it's not exactly the prettiest. It's not exactly controlling play. It's a good shooting percentage, and it's Zibanejad showing a pulse. I mean, this is not a very high bar to clear. Like we said,
Yeah.
you win 2 games in a week, you're right back
We're
in the
back.
mix. You
Yeah.
win 3 games in a week, you actually build some space. They can't win
Well,
3
well,
games
they
in a
can't.
week
Well, they
though.
can't do that. They haven't done that in 4 months, Nick. But like, yeah, it's. I wrote an article that I dusted off the old Substack. I've written 2 articles for that thing. One was last year, and this one was last week. I don't write too much, but I did dust off the old pen and paper and did write an article. And and I wrote, "Do the Rangers have a plan?" We talked about this last week on the show. I kind of fleshed out my thoughts a little bit on that article, and the TLDRs. The answer is no, because the jury made a bunch of moves and they're all sitting. The Han healthy scratch for reasons. Carson Soucy has been so bad, he's also healthy scratch, despite you trading a high third-round pick in order to acquire him. Okay, he's not playing. Parsonen not playing. Like, so then why did you trade for them? What was the point? What was the plan? And like this all goes to the wider conversation of, okay, well, what is the plan for this team right now? What is the plan for this team next season? And what is the plan for the team beyond? If your plans as general manager of this team is to be busy and make trades for the sake of making trades, which I don't think was the purpose of these trades. I would have to imagine that Chris Drury is throwing darts at a board and trying to see if things work. But the thing about some of these trades, especially the Soucy one, is giving up a high third round pick. Now, again, picks could be anything. It could even be a boat, like, you pick between a boat and this mystery box. Oh, well, there's anything could be in the mystery box, could even be a boat, right? Like the pick doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but the conversation is that third round pick was San Jose's. So it was going to be a pretty decently valuable pick. You traded that, you flipped that from the Riley Smith trade in order to acquire a defenseman. The thought process behind that is not just you throwing darts at a board. That is a pretty okay asset that you just acquired for a player you gave up. You traded away to acquire. So if he's been so poor on your team that he's already sitting, then what was the scouting process like prior to you making the trade? What was the conversation before Chris Drury called up Rutherford of Vancouver and said, "Hey, that third round pick that we just got, how about you give us Carson Soucy for it? How about that?" I want to know what the Rangers war room saw in Soucy prior to that trade, to where Chris Drury pulled it off and it took like 3 days for the Rangers to already be regretting it. Like, the Parsonen thing is like, okay, you traded for him, but he could have been like an extra as a contract to kind of even out the contracts with, you know, Parsonen. You can argue Dahan's been actively good, and he keeps sitting for instead of Vakanainen for reasons.
What's
Vakanainen
that
again,
tweet? Former first
Vakanainen
round pick.
again. Vakanainen is just you watch him play, and I was at the game yesterday against Edmonton, and he's too slow. He doesn't know what to do with the puck. He's not like it almost when Vakanainen plays when he's on the ice, it almost always looks like he's stuck between two decisions, and he doesn't
Game's too
know
fast for him.
and he
Game's too
doesn't
fast.
know which one is correct. So he ends up floundering and making the wrong decision if by default because he's taking too long to think about the play that he should be making. That is Urho Vakanainen's game, which is why he's okay as a seventh defenseman in a pinch, but there's no world in which he should be playing top 6 minutes, let alone top 4, top 2 minutes. Like he cannot play the game that way. So it continues to baffle me that Dahan is sitting for Vakanainen. Susie's already sitting up in the press box with everybody else. What was the point of you doing that if you're already regretting the moves that you did? So all of this to say, Drury was busy. Everybody that he brought in is not playing, and the Rangers continue to be as mid as they were prior to the trades. So I ask again, what is the plan?
They tried to overhaul the defense in season because the defense was actively hindering them. And I wrote this down because someone asked me about this. So during the losing streak, which was the first time they played Edmonton to the 4th of January, which was when they went 5-15. In that window, they were averaging giving up 3.31 goals against per 60 minutes. They had a 38% goal share for a month, effectively. 38% goal share. They had about a 45% expected goal share and a 42% high danger chance share. The defense was actively bad. Kirschuri said, okay, I can't let this season get away from us. I need to do something. They do the Trouba for Vakanainen. They do Kakko for Borgen. They think, okay, we changed a third of our defense. Let's try this out. Fox getting hurt in there throws a wrinkle in there. But fundamentally, and I agree with you what you're saying, and I think the Rangers have been guilty of this for a long time of they don't think about the fit when they look at guys. They say, this is a good hockey player. We want him. There's the speech that Jonah Hill gives gives Brad Pitt in Moneyball, where he says teams don't think in terms of buying wins. They think in terms of buying players. And that's the mistake. Your goal shouldn't be to buy players. It should be to buy wins. And how do you buy wins? By scoring more goals than the other team. So, and fundamentally, I think this is the Rangers' issue. And I think the game against Edmonton, I think the game against Winnipeg, and even the game against Ottawa are good encapsulations of this. The Rangers played not to lose. The Rangers played low event, try and slow the game down, and we wait for Adam Fox, or we wait for Panarin, or we wait for JT Miller to make a play for us. Or in the case of the Ottawa game, we just got to get to the end. We just got to hold on. We don't need to actively push harder.
Right.
And that's been
that's called playing not to lose as
Yes.
opposed to playing to win.
And that's been the Rangers' issue when they've gotten deeper into these playoff runs, is that their potato gun offense runs out of juice because they don't generate enough sustained offensive zone time. They don't create enough high danger chances at 5-on-5. So those games in the regular season that are 4-3, 3-2, we're looking at 2-1, 3-2. We're desperate for a power play opportunity. We are desperate for our goalie to be close to perfect. And the fewer paths to victory you have, the harder it is to win. And I can vividly go back in my head and say, when we did the preview episode for the Florida series last spring, or that might have been summer at that point, but when I did the episode, I can vividly say, remember saying, if the Rangers can keep this 45-55 or better, they'll be able to hang around in this series 45-55 in terms of the scoring chances, the high danger, the expected goals, because the Rangers' high end talent was good last year. Panarin was a Hart Trophy caliber player. Fox, even with the knee injury, was fringe Norris Trophy good last year. Those two alone keep you in the conversation. So even if you don't have a majority of the possession, even if you don't have a great control of the game, that's enough to keep you in the conversation. This year, Panarin, massive regression. Fox, regression, injury, bad defensive partner nuking his minutes. You add that up, And the Rangers, as has been the case for a lot of the season, just a lot of looking around and waiting for someone to make a play. That game last night, that was there for the taking. The
Yeah.
Rangers score one more goal in that game, and it's a very different game. But being that they don't have that high end dynamism that they've had in years past from Panarin, from Fox, even from Zibanejad or Kreider, it's a lot more of a slog. It's a lot harder for them to score consistently. And it's been, the defining problem this season. They don't score enough, and it puts more of an emphasis on their defense and their goaltending. And the defense, as we've established here, is featuring Vakanainen, Borgen, Miller, Fox, Zach Jones, and Braden Schneider. And even of those six guys, the only one I have any real confidence in on a regular basis is Adam Fox. And even Fox, he can't do it all by himself. That's one guy. And that's kind of the Rangers' issue right now.
And I'm gonna bring this comment up from Frank Herndon on Twitter, who responding to my point about Drury making all those trades. The point of defensive health and depth, they had to do something. Which again, you're missing the point of what I said. You shouldn't. You can't make trades just to make them, Frank. That's the whole idea. You are making trades in the Rangers' case to make the team better, not for you don't trade a high third round pick for a guy to sit on the bench as an eighth defenseman in the case somebody goes down. That's not what that trade was about. So again, the conversation here that we're trying to have here is that what is the point?
He tried to make the defense better. Yeah, he tried.
Right,
yeah,
he did. Yeah, he tried. But again,
he tried to hire Mike Sullivan and Rod Brindamore too.
Yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, I've tried.
He tried to trade for JT Miller 2 years ago.
I've tried to win the lottery. Like, we can all try to do things, but that doesn't mean that your plan is going to actively be good. Like, it's one of those situations where if at any point, the point of making of any trade, you have seen enough game film, have dug deep into a player's, hopefully their analytics and the way that they play, and maybe, how their metrics are without their partner or their forward line or whatever, whoever it is. You analyze how they play in their own system and also how they play in chaotic situations, how they can, how quickly they read the game, right? There's a lot of different factors that go into a player and when you are going to acquire them. So again, my question is, if the Rangers did their due diligence on Carson Soucy, which I would have to imagine that they did, then why is he already sitting games? And I want to I want to highlight that I am not rooting for him to be back in the lineup either, because he hasn't been good. I've been rooting for Calvin Tahad, who has been good. Why is he sitting? And Urho Vakanainen, who's a step slow and can't really read the game all that quickly, playing top 4 minutes.
Vakanainen reminds me a lot of Libor Hayek in that respect, where the game just looks way too fast for him, and the decisions, like, even though he's got okay skating skill, he just never seems to be in the right place at the right time, and the game's just too fast for him. He's always caught in between whether he should be turning his body or he should be back skating. He's always a step slow to a net front scramble, and some of that is just instinctual. You're either good at that or you're not. Sure, the Rangers could conceivably make him better, but I point you to one of my favorite.
Well, they're going to have to, because they gave him that 2-year extension for no
for no reason.
Very little reason.
I'm sure Chris Drury was terrified about the bidding war that was going to ensue on July 1st for the services of Urho Vakanainen. But again, that is another example. And the Rangers love to do that. Every team loves to do this. We loved him in his draft year and we've been keeping an eye on him forever. And that's great and all, but have you kept tabs on him since he was drafted? Because I don't know if you know this, Andrew, the Anaheim Ducks could use defensemen.
Yeah.
And if Urho Vakanainen was good, I'm sure the Ducks would be playing him. And it's the same thing with Will Borgen. I think Borgen is okay, but if the Seattle Kraken, who are not a good team, again, don't think he's good enough for them, why are you trying to get the leftovers from the Ducks and the Kraken? Those are not high bars. And people always say, well, you can't compare yourself to other teams. Everyone's got to play their own pace. I'm sorry, man. you look at the Panthers, you look at the Lightning, you look at the Hurricanes, the Capitals, you look at the Eastern Conference at large, Toronto, New Jersey, those teams have a certain baseline. And yeah, you have to, it ebbs and flows year to year. Some teams are better year over year, but you build your team out a certain way. And the way, it might not be the most productive way to think about things, but the way I've been operating for the last year and change, 2 years, is would this guy be good enough to be on the Florida Panthers? And the answer in almost every case for guys Drury's gone out and gotten has been no.
Is no.
I'll give you Sam Carrick. Sam Carrick could be the Panthers' fourth line center. I'll give you
Sure.
that. Jonathan Quick could be their backup goalie. I'll give you
Yeah.
that. But
JT
beyond
Miller,
that,
JT Miller,
yeah,
definitely going to be a player for the Panthers. Sure.
but the problem is defensemen have been the Rangers' issue basically my entire life, and having the good goalie. And I can still vividly picture watching NBCSN intermission reports with Mike Milbury and Keith Jones and them citing the Rangers' goals against as the reason they're a good defensive team, as if they didn't have Lundqvist fighting for his life every single night in the crease. But that's kind of how it feels we're operating here, that the defining metrics for good defense are plus minus and goals against, because you ask the average for
Yeah.
even last year, when the Rangers were not a good defensive team, you would have people arguing in your mentions on Twitter. How can you say they're bad at defense? Look at their goals against, look at their penalty killing.
Right.
Yes, that's because they had the best goalie in the playoffs last year. Shesterkin played out of his goddamn
Well,
mind in the
those
playoffs.
people are willingly ignorant. Like at a certain point, it's just exhausting to like argue with those people. It really is, because they are actively choosing. It's a choice to not see slash understand slash want to understand the full picture. Like, just give them the coloring book, and it's just easier that way. This is the thing, man. And I don't want to disparage any fans. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to pretend like, oh, I'm the smartest person in the room at all times, and if if you disagree, that that you're stupid. Like, that's not the point of what I'm trying to say. The point is that if you're only citing one or two pieces of, very surface level data and ignoring the mountain of other evidence to support otherwise, that's on you, dog. Like, the whole point of, you know, creating a debate, a debate or an opinion is to look at, okay, yeah, the goals against are one thing and the plus minus is, very, whatever. But also, what about the defensive structure? What about, is it the goaltending saving the day? Is it the, like, what is the defense doing? Are they protecting the goalie? Is it all of the goalie? Is it none of the goalie? How are the forwards coming back and supporting the defense? How does all of that play into the defensive structure of the Rangers or whatever team that you're arguing about? For people to unironically puff their chest and say X team is good because their goals against is low tells me everything that I have to know about you as a hockey fan, because you're not diving into the reason behind that number. You are looking at, the tip of the iceberg and saying, "Oh, that's not a very deep iceberg. Look, we can see the tip of it." But you're not looking at the whole picture. How can you know? You don't know that.
It's a real conundrum because it kind of feels like that's how Chris Drury's built the defense over the last handful of years is, well, we have good goals against averages, and it's why we got to give Will Borgen a 5-year contract 17 games into him being on the team. I mean, what about those 17 games that Will Borgen's played in gave you the impression that this was someone you absolutely needed to have?
For
And
5 more years,
yeah,
5 years. For why?
based on 17 games.
It's
And
just, yeah.
the stats are fine. I mean, he's not an atrocious player. It's just I don't understand why on an on
Yeah.
a team that has struggled that has struggled to deal with the fact that it's hard to liquidate some of their contracts. You know, the fact we had to do the Barkley Gaudreau stuff and the Jacob Trouba stuff over the summer that bled over into the season. The fact that it's on the record now that you tried to trade Zibanejad and Kreider. The fact that you can't trade them without Zibanejad's permission. Kreider's got a 16-team no trade. You can't trade Trocheck. You can't trade Panarin. How are you supposed to improve the team if the only guys you can get rid of are the young and cheap ones? The margin for error and the margins for improvement, when your entire team is effectively veterans that are capped out as what they are, you don't have any room to grow. You know, sure, you like what you've seen from Berard, excuse me. You like what you've seen in doses from Rempe and from Othman and Edstrom before he got hurt, but those guys are playing like 9 minutes a night. How are they supposed to get better? And that's really the conundrum. And I think it ties nicely to your point about a lack of a plan. Why is Brendan Austin playing 7 minutes a night? He's not getting anything out of that. And he's looking better the more he plays. He definitely looks a little more comfortable with the speed of the game. But you're telling me that we're going to go into next season and they're going to get rid of one of Kreider or both, one of Kreider or Zibanejad in the summer, and they're just going to drop Brendan Othman into the top six?
No,
Like the
no.
math, the math ain't
They're
mathing
gonna
here.
find another, maybe low 30s, high 20s
Sam Bennett,
player to sign him to a 7-year deal, and we're
Sam
gonna do
Bennett.
this all over again. This is what's gonna happen.
It'll be Sam Bennett or it'll be 37-year-old Brad Marchand. Those are both the most obvious Chris Drury. Like, we need more annoying guys to play against as opposed to guys scoring goals. And
And
I,
I would like Sam Bennett. I would like Brad Marchand. The problem isn't bringing those guys in. It's, oh my God, they're gonna overpay massively to bring those guys in, which leaves no room for anybody else. And then we're gonna run back the same team, and we're gonna run back the same experiment, hoping for different results.
And it's funny we're talking about this. I had a really long conversation about the Leafs on Saturday because the game was on at the bar, and I was talking to one of my friends about it, and he's like, "So why'd they give all that money to those bums?" Is what he said, because he was talking about like Reeves, Yarncroc, bottom sixers. And the way I described it was teams when they can't add any more high end players because they just can't afford it, they go that route because those guys are cheaper and because those guys give them a feeling. I can draw a perfect parallel to this. They're in the intermission last night. Valaket was talking about how Rempe is so noticeable every time he plays. He only has 6 shifts tonight, but every time he's out there, he's noticeable. Well, if he's only playing 6 shifts a night, the coach can't think that much of him. He can't be that good if he can't get out there more than that. And that's not an indictment. I think Rempe's largely been fine over the last few weeks. It's, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to win these games? Or are we trying to see what we have in Matt Rempe and Zach Jones and Brendan Othman and Brett Berard? Or are we trying to do both? And those two things are not congruous with each other. You can't be trying to win every game and running a short bench and running only three
Yeah.
lines and two pairs and at the same time say, well, we got to be worried about next year, because those things are not in alignment. And I do wonder on some level if Chris Drury and Peter Laviolette ever actually talk to each other at any point, because I feel like pretty often Drury brings a player in and then Laviolette's just like, no, I don't think so. Or the inverse of, I really like this guy, and then Drury has to make them go away. Like in November of last year, Nick Bonino was the third line center, and they released him, and he never got picked up again. So, like, I really do wonder about the philosophical alignment between coaching staff and front office, because a lot of the messaging is very muddled, it's very inconsistent, and it's not in alignment with what we're seeing on game nights.
Well, that's been one of the most frustrating things about all this. Like, if the messaging was differ to what we would have wanted, but it would have been consistent from Drury, Laviolette, and everybody else, it would be less frustrating by default. Because again, I would have to think that Laviolette is in control of who's playing game in and game out. So why is Drury trading for Dahan if he's not playing? Why is he trading for Parson when he's not playing? Why is he trading for Susie when he's not playing? And it all goes back to, I would have to imagine that Jury and Laviolette are in constant communication. To what extent and how that impacts the lineup, I couldn't possibly tell you that. And I think the only two people that could tell you that for sure is Laviolette and Chris Drury. But it does feel like there is this disconnect between two parties. And I would think that Drury is pushing on Laviolette to win as many games as possible. I would have to think, because if they don't make the playoffs, it would be shocking to me if either of them had a job for the Rangers come October. I would have to imagine that Chris Drury is making all of these moves, is pushing Laviolette to win all the, like trying to min max his roster to the extreme, regardless of whether or not the decisions that go into the roster changes are correct or not, or the most optimal play or not, because he feels the pressure. Because if the Rangers don't make the playoffs, again, I'm not reporting anything, but this is not this is not me, this is not rocket science here. The logical conclusion is that if the Rangers miss the playoffs, both Drury and Laviolette are probably gone. So the push is, okay, well, you got to play everybody, you got to play them now, but also we don't have the talent to push Othman out of the lineup, to push Berard out of the lineup. So you got to play them too. Just keep trying to win as much as you can while I put this fire out behind me. That seems like the vibe right now. And you can tell that based off the roster, based off the disconnect that we see between both parties, and just the overall vibe of the team. Like there's not a whole lot of everybody kind of seems like they're playing for themselves, except for when they have an odd man rush, and then that's their golden opportunity.
That Pat
That's their golden opportunity to show, hey, we love each other. Hey, we're gonna pass the puck around 17 times and then not get a shot on goal. Like I tweeted this out during the game yesterday. It's like this team hates shooting more than any roster I've ever seen before. They just
Schneider had that
they
Schneider
hate
had
it.
that one rush opportunity last night where he was in on Stuart Skinner
Yeah.
and he dropped past behind him instead of taking a shot. And at a certain point, I think that's fundamentally just they have no confidence. And
Yeah.
if
Right.
I don't
I
shoot the
agree.
puck, I can't get in trouble. If
Yeah.
I don't shoot the puck, it's not my fault. And I think that has long been a Rangers issue. And it's funny. I was having a conversation with someone this morning, actually, while I was making my breakfast. And I said they're an entire team of conduits. They can channel whatever energy is going on, but they don't have any actual conductors. Nobody themselves actually gets the electricity going. It's a bunch of guys who wait around for something to happen. And it's why the vibe can escalate really well and why it can deteriorate really fast. And I think it's fundamentally a sign of a weak team that they can't be self-starters, that they can't materialize the changes and conditions that they want. You think about the Jack Nicholson monologue at the beginning of The Departed. I want my environment to be a product of me, not I don't want to be a product of my environment. There's a bunch of guys who are a product of their environment that, oh, everything's so bad. We only won 5 out of the last 20 games. Chris Drury, we need help. Okay, here's JT Miller. Well, we still can't play defense and we still can't score on the power play, but JT Miller's here now, and that's effectively the story of the season. They went out and got a point per game player, and it really hasn't mattered all that much. And I think that needs to tell you, and I think that's the last real big point I want to hit on here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that tells you this group is done as far as being a serious contender. Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, Trocheck, Miller, your 5 most expensive forwards, then Lafreniere. That's your 6 most expensive forwards. All of them, other than Lafreniere, are over the age of 30. Trocheck and Zibanejad have, I think, 4 more years each on their respective contracts, 3 more years. Panarin has 2, Kreider has 1. We're getting to a point now where you need to actively be thinking about what the next iteration of this team looks like. And instead, Chris Drury's throwing Carson Soucy and he's throwing these middling and Will Borgen stopgaps in the way. After 2016, when they lost to the Penguins in the first round decisively in 5 games, they had a real point of delineation there where they looked around and said, well, we're probably not going to be able to do anything with this group. We should try and cut our losses in some departments. And they were able to turn Broussard into Zibanejad, and that helped out a lot that they were able to take advantage of Ottawa there. But that's kind of what you need now. You need your next version of that. You need to turn a guy in their late 20s or early 30s into an upside RFA who you think you can tap into with a bigger role.
Trevor Zegras, baby. We're so back. It's all coming full circle. We get Trevor Zegras, and the season is saved.
Trevor Zegras, the funny thing about that, and not to go on too long of a tangent here, but like,
by the way, for those that can't tell, it's a joke. It's
facetious,
a little
facetious.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an exaggeration.
The thing that's interesting about that is we have heard repeatedly that Trevor Zegras would like to come to the Rangers, and that from what I've gathered, that he's not a Chris Drury guy. He's not gritty. He's not from upstate New York or Western Pennsylvania.
Didn't
he's
play
from
hockey
Connecticut.
with his kid.
Yeah. Didn't play hockey with his kid, or isn't the son of a powerful agent. Or played with his dad in Colorado 20 something years ago, like Jake Lecision. But when you look at it on its face value, someone like Trevor Zegras is the archetype, underperforming RFA in a shitty environment that has never really been around winning, very much the same way Zibanejad had in Ottawa. He'd been to the playoffs, I think, once at that point, but that's the type of swing you need to make. You need your Matthew Tkachuk trade. You need your big swing. And first of all, the Rangers don't have any like blue chip guys to trade away. They're going to be eating a loss on pretty much whoever they trade away. And because of that, it's really given this state of existentialism to the direction of the team, because you've got Shesterkin, you've got Fox. That's enough to keep you in the
and
conversation.
Gabriel Perreault whenever he comes.
Eventually. In theory. I know people are banking on that, but until I see him in a Ranger sweater playing more than 9 minutes a night, I'm going to be very skeptical of him being a high-end player. Because when you look at it, the Rangers' two most successful forward draft picks of the 21st century are Chris Kreider and JT Miller. And both of those guys took 5 seasons to actually stick and be consistent NHLers. So even if Gabriel Perreault is good, JT Miller and Chris Kreider are very good hockey players. It still took them 5 years for the Rangers organization to be like, yeah, I think you're good. And that's kind of a problem when Shesterkin's 29 and Adam Fox is 27.
The only pushback I'll give to that is Will Cooley made the roster last season out of nowhere, and he's just genuinely been a good player. But a lot of that boils down to the desire of the player to want to do that. Like, Will Cooley kept breaking down doors in order to essentially be like, nobody could then close the door on him because all of them were broken. So he stayed on the roster, and he's been one of, if not the best forward for this team, which again goes back to our point of if Will Cooley is the best player on your roster,
the most consistent,
best forward or most consistent forward on your roster, on a roster with Panarin, Zibanejad, Kreider, Trocheck, Lafreniere, all these guys, JT Miller, even though he's been a point of game player, last few games he's taken like 5 unnecessary penalties for no reason, especially like in the Columbus game. He took like 2, very like frustrated for no reason type of penalties, which Columbus didn't score on because their power play has been bad. But he took one against Edmonton last night. It was just, cross-checking McDavid for no reason. 0 reason. I don't know why he did that, but he did that again. That's been frustrating. And, a lot of this comes down to, okay, well, the Gabe Perreault conversation is difficult to have because, he's doing really well in college. The Rangers are famously very good at, grooming their good players, their good prospects into becoming good players. Surely we have a long list of, wait, actually, no, we don't. But like that question aside, you even go back to the power play against Edmonton, the play where Fox has the puck in the defensive end. He comes up to center ice and then drops it to Panarin, who then skates up into the blue line, and they pass it 17 times for then JT Miller up along that left bumper to take that one-timer is the most predictable play in hockey. I saw it in the game like 7 or 8 times. The other team has scouted that play multiple times. It's a stoppable play. The point of that play is to have more than one of those in your back pocket. The problem is that the Rangers, like, that's one of their problems on the power play right now, is that they are so incredibly predictable because one, they don't shoot the puck.
No.
They keep trying to force the one play or two plays in practice that they are working on, trying to create the perfect play, trying to create, okay, Zibanejad has it. He's going to pass it back. And we're going to pass it again. We're going to pass it again. And we're going to pass it again. We're going to pass it 17 more times. Eventually, the seas will part for like zero point 0.4 seconds. And then, Panarin can cross ice to Miller, who will cleanly catch the pass on his stick, and the one timer will go, top shelf, and it's a power play goal, and everybody will go home happy. Yeah, that's great. But the thing about hockey, I don't know if you know this, Nick, is that it's an unpredictable sport where a lot of things that you don't predict, that you can't plan on, can and will happen on a night to night basis. You cannot plan out a perfect power play goal every single time. You have to lean in to the unpredictability of the sport in order to make your power play as dynamic as it could possibly be. That's what the best teams do. Of course, sure, the best power plays have the best talent, but those best talents lean in on that unpredictability because other teams don't know what they're going to do. The Rangers' power play right now is as cold as it is because teams know exactly what they're going to do. So preventing them from creating these really good chances is relatively easier comparatively to even what they did last year.
So while you were talking, I went and pulled up Panarin's power play stuff alone, and on an individual basis, he's averaging 3 fewer shots per 60 minutes of power play time than last season. That's a big drop off. Everything else is relatively comparable. The volume of chances is less than it was, almost half as many goals for on the power play as last season. And just when you think about it in the context of how this team is supposed to play, that they are supposed to rely on their handful of big guys to swing these close games, to win the game on the power play and on the penalty kill, because that's where your best players can thrive the most, where they can have most direct impact on the overall flow of the game. And we've talked about it for years that when you are so heavily predicated on special teams and goaltending, you eventually become subject to the whims of shooting percentage. And this year in particular, not huge drop offs, but if every single guy is 1 or 2 or 3% worse shooting simultaneously, you're going to have offensive issues the way you are this year. And fundamentally, as much as we've harped on the defense and as much as we've harped on the power play, this team does not score enough. Because they don't score enough, it puts more responsibility on the defense and the goaltending to be even better. And when you do that, the entire recipe falls apart. We talk a lot about the idea of even strength, special teams, goaltending as the three prongs. And right now, they've really only got the goaltending kind of going and the penalty kill going. The power play is not going, and the 5-on-5 offense, even with a point per game player in JT Miller added to the mix, is not even close to 50%. A lot of those metrics are in the low 40s. And because of that, the rest of it falls apart. If you got the wobbly chair leg and you lean too much on it and the chair tips over, that's what the Rangers do on a nightly basis every night. They lean too far in the chair with a leg that's too short. They fall over, they end up on the floor. And instead of trying to put like a coaster under the leg or fixing the leg, they get back in the chair and then immediately lean on the leg that's broken again and keep falling over and over again like it's a Three Stooges sketch. That's kind of the issue right now. And there is no magic reinforcement on the way. Sure, okay, let's change the coach again. Let's change the GM. Okay,
We talked about this last year. We talked about this when Laviolette got hired. It's like at a certain point, the coach doesn't even matter anymore because this has been the same core for the past 3-4 coaches or whatever it has been, and the problems have been there the entire way. The problems have persisted. When it gets to the best teams in the NHL, come playoff time, the Rangers crumble. The Rangers crumble. The Rangers crumble. The Rangers crumble. Whether that be Laviolette, David Quinn, Laviolette, regardless of who it is, the Rangers crumble. Now we're here. It's the same core. You can change the GM. You can change the coach. But how many chances is this core going to get? And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier on. If they don't make the playoffs, I would have to imagine that Drury's gone, Laviolette is gone, and I would, if I were a betting man, I'd say some big chunk of this core is going to be gone as well.
They're really stuck. There's no other way to put it. They are really stuck. They've given out some bad contracts. They've gambled on some guys, and now they're sitting here.
Even with the increasing cap, it's still bad contracts.
Yeah, of course, yeah, sure. Zibanejad's 8.25 is going to look like 6.25. That's still too much for a guy who's only going to have 55, 60 points next year if everything goes right. They're stuck,
and this is with his hot scoring pace the last like 20 or so games.
Yeah, they're very stuck. It'll be fun. At the very least, these last 14 games will have an element of fun to them because if they sneak in, we'll all talk ourselves into them beating Washington in the first
2012
round.
LA Kings, baby. Here we go.
Hey, anything is possible. That's why we play the games.
Yeah.
That's why.
I was talking to somebody about it, and they were like, well, the 2012 LA Kings fired their coach halfway through. And I responded to them like, in my head, like, it does, like, whoever's behind the Rangers bench doesn't even matter right now because the same core. This has been the same problem. Past 4 coaches, however many it's been the same problem. So who cares who's behind the bench? It's all on the players. So if they wanted, they could be the 2012 Kings again. Let me live in my delusions. It's not going to happen. It just if people like to call me negative and whatever. This is me being overly delusionally positive. Let me be that for once. I'm already there. I'm so far beyond that. I'm just I've created this world and I'm living in it. And until the Rangers prove me otherwise, that's where my rent is going. How about that?
Okay. I think that'll do it for this week's show. Big week. If they want to stay alive, they got to actually win some of these games and not just limp to overtime. We'll talk to you guys next week. If you could be so kind, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live.